Hello, I'm Conrad Bain. Tonight on the Bladtcast, we're starting a special two-part show on a very sensitive and important subject. Now, we urge families, children, and parents alike to watch both of these informative episodes and then to discuss the problem presented, which is of deep concern to all of us. And now, the Bladtcast. Welcome, I'm Christian Bladt, joined for the first time ever on this show, tragically, by Mr. Ron Motta. Ron, first and foremost, I have to apologize for not having you on any of the Star Trek or Doctor Who episodes that I've done.
No worries.
It's a crime against maybe not humanity, but I definitely, you were the person I knew who liked Doctor Who before the reboot. You're literally the only one I knew because I was a huge Star Trek nerd and I would try to watch Doctor Who, and I'm like, it's just not for me. This is just my I've since watched some of the old stuff, and I'm like, I can pick and choose what I kind of like. I've messaged you that for some reason I gravitated to Peter Davison, but conversations for other times.
Right.
I appreciate you being here today. This is always the episode. I've been doing this podcast, the Bladtcast, for 10 years now, and this was always the episode I knew I wanted to do with you. And this is our very special episode where we talk about very special episodes, of which there are many that stand out. The one that we'll start with in a moment is sort of it's like the GOAT. It's like the progenitor. It's the building block of all very special episodes. And I think
the LeBron James of special
episodes. Is definitely the LeBron James. The important thing about the very special episode is that it is always a show that is otherwise a comedy. And the ones that are truly memorable have jokes surrounding things that are not comedic. And that is the case of the first one that we'll talk about. Now, going back through history, there are some that I had forgotten about that do predate this. There's a Leave It to Beaver where they hire a handyman who's a drunk, but they don't tell Beaver, they don't tell Beaver that he's a drunk. And so Beaver's like, oh yeah, I'll get you this this bottle that we got from my uncle. And they're like, Beaver, why did you give it to him? He's like, you didn't tell me I wasn't supposed to. There's Maude deciding to have an abortion. One that I don't think, I feel like we can do a series of these, you and I, Ron. I don't want to do Edith Bunker gets raped. There's some that it's just like, it's fascinating from like studying TV, the way the studio audience reacts to, the guy in the house, but it's like, it's not fun to talk about.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
And in the years since, there'll be episodes that you're like, oh, they're trying to recreate the first one that we're going to do. I remember a Growing Pains where Dick Van Patten played the manager of like a convenience store that Mike works at night. And he's really racist. And you feel like, Dick Van Patten's trying to get the role from someone in the show that we're going to talk about.
Right.
And they sometimes feel like they're going for, in Wayne's World, they do the Emmy clip, the Oscars clip. This is the Emmy clip where it's like, I'm just going to cry. It's like, and I never learned how to read. That's sort of a thing. You definitely get that vibe sometimes. And I think that the reason that we're going to start with the one we are is because it is legitimately an incredibly important issue. It is something that I think hadn't been talked about enough in 1983. When the two episodes aired, and we'll reveal what it is in a moment. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Ron?
Well, I was going to say that, two things. One, the hallmark of a very special episode is that they take the ills of society and discuss them in the most tone-deaf way possible.
Yes.
And the other thing is that we're not making fun of the topics these shows cover.
No.
We're making fun of the fact that they decided to add a laugh track onto these shows.
Yeah.
At really inappropriate moments, as you'll see.
And I don't want to get this episode pulled down, so I'm not going to share clips from three different, if they were all one studio, I feel like I could get away with it. But we'll talk about it. We have some images, we have things. And I think that the one that we're not doing is the example I always use is the Family Ties when Tom Hanks is their uncle who's a drunk.
Yes.
It's like, you know, and I haven't seen it in the 21st century. And I remember him rummaging around trying to drink vanilla extract because there's
Yes.
12% alcohol in it. I remember things like that really well. There's another one where like somebody who manages the TV station they work at tries to open mouth kiss Mallory. And I'm like, I've never seen that one. Yeah, that one I don't even remember. You know,
Right.
there's very memorable ones. Growing Pains has like 5 of them. You know?
Oh my God, yeah.
There's one where Alan Thicke is trying to talk a girl out of killing herself in the driveway for the whole episode. And so I think it's important to put these things into context.
Yes.
And I do think legitimately in most cases, they're very well intentioned. They're like, you know, we have this platform. We should talk about an issue that, you know, society doesn't pay enough attention to. So if, you know, and Ron, we're similar ages, you know, if you're growing up in the 80s, there are some very scary characters on your television every day.
Oh, yeah.
And some of them, there's different levels of what you're scared of. The most terrifying was not Gargamel, not Megatron, Mumra from Thundercats, not Darth Vader, but it was indeed this guy who owned the bike shop. Curly, who owned the bike shop on Diff'rent Strokes.
That's right.
And I remember seeing it as a kid, and we just have to talk about the Bicycle Man as the title of the episode. There's 2 episodes called The Bicycle Man 1 and 2. It does start with a very earnest intro from Conrad Bain, which I may have lightly lampooned in the intro to our show. And this is after WKRP in Cincinnati. I legitimately didn't have the timeline right in my head. When I watched it, I'm like, wait, this is 1983. I thought it was earlier than that. So he was done being the lovable Mr. Carlson.
The big guy. Yep.
To his credit, like he knew that he could get typecast. It was a very uncomfortable part for him to play, but he felt like it was a good role. And I mean, it's so memorable. When was the first time you saw The Bicycle Man, Ron? Did you see it?
It was on. No, it was on its original airing. I loved Diff'rent Strokes. When I was a kid, that was my show. My goal at the time was to be the white Gary Coleman. I'm not making that up.
Which is funny because around NBC, that's what we used to call you, the white Gary Coleman. And for some reason, our friend Tom Kelly was always called the white Todd Bridges. But I never quite understood why.
So I saw the Bicycle Man episode, on its original airing. I want to say that it was on a Saturday night, but I could be wrong. But I mean, my parents, were pretty open about that sort of thing, and they wanted, they always they sat me down. They told me, now if someone, tries to touch you inappropriately somewhere, and, it could be anyone. So just be on your guard, blah, 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 but it's a lot different when you're sitting in your living room next to your parents. And all of a sudden, you see Gordon jump, trying to, touch Dudley and Arnold. And, I just remember being really, really uncomfortable around my parents watching this. I really wanted them to, get up and, my dad's like, oh, the hockey game's on. I'll go and watch it on the other TV or something like that. Right. Yeah, exactly. That was my first impression of the Bicycle Shop.
Yeah, and I think first of all, I also love Diff'rent Strokes. Now I saw it on afternoon syndication in New York. It was on Channel 5. I think it was at 5:00. So I was always hoping that dinner was late because dinner was usually at 5. If dinner was at 5:30, I got Diff'rent Strokes in, and it's a fun show. Rewatching it, I'm kind of reminded of things that worked. One of the other shows we'll talk about something that's just, a character that's incredibly funny that you don't necessarily is sort of the unsung hero, but Gary Coleman's lines were usually pretty good. And people basically boil it down to what you talking about, Willis?
Yeah.
You know? So I saw this in the afternoon, and sometimes your very special episodes don't go into syndication. They only go into syndication maybe at nighttime, depending on where it airs. Now, I don't know if cities who had morning syndication, if it was on at like 10 a.m., maybe they wouldn't show it. I honestly don't know, but I know I saw it, and I was like, "What in the hell is going on?" But what I will say is, it kind of even I don't know how young I was seeing it. If it was first run in 1983, let's assume I was like 8 or 9, maybe 10 when the reruns were happening, and I was just like, I feel like I knew what was bad about that guy because of that show. I knew what to look for. I also was like, yeah, probably shouldn't be alone with grown-ups, right? Is that the takeaway, and there's the trusted adults. And I think that, child abuse, obviously it happened. And it was a time in history, this moment in the mid 80s, where it was talked about a little bit more, and it was kind of one of the first times that it was really talked about. I think, I remember, there's from the back of comic books for a few months, the back of Marvel comic books, there was a tease to it was basically to send away for this power pack and the Amazing Spider-Man. There was a special issue where I think it was a friend of the power pack had a babysitter who touched them, and it was just, so it was like dealing with it in a way where it's like, is it the greatest Spider-Man story? No, absolutely not. But if a kid reads that and thinks, oh, that thing that's going on in my life, I'm not comfortable with, that right there is reason enough to go like, yeah, let's take the chance and do this. So let's give kudos to everyone on Diff'rent Strokes for thinking we should tackle this story.
Well, I mean, that's like the interesting thing about like the very special episodes is that, even though it might seem like off, or the platform might seem, kind of off, the messages definitely get through. The first time I found out that blackface was offensive was watching Give Me a Break. And they did an episode where the older sister is jealous of Joey Lawrence. So to get him in trouble, she had him put on blackface, and Nell Carter like went ballistic. And that's how I found out. I was like, I think 9 or 10 at the time.
But by the way, let me just interject, Ron. You never want to walk into a room in blackface as a white person.
No.
But also the last person you want in that room is probably Nell Carter. You're like, as a kid, you're like, oh no, from everybody from TV. And look, and I remember this specifically because I have a younger sister. At this time, when we were kids, the conceit on Sesame Street was that Big Bird had this friend, Mr. Snuffleupagus. Yes. And the running joke for like, by the time that we were watching Sesame Street, the joke had been going on for more than a decade. No grownups ever saw Mr. Snuffleupagus. So they just were convinced that he wasn't real. He was an imaginary friend. And so for very logical reasons tied in directly to what we're talking about, they decided like, no, we're going to make sure that the grownups know that if you tell them something, they're going to believe you. So they make a point, and Phil Donahue's there to cover it. It's like everybody's going to meet Mr. Snuffleupagus. And that's the thinly veiled point. If you have something that's important to you and you tell a grown-up, they're going to believe you.
Right.
And it's such it's a reason where if it's like, if the audience isn't kids, everybody makes the point of like, oh, you're bound to some kind of pressure or whatever. I'm like, no, this is a great idea. This is a great lesson for kids that, yes, we believe you. And, all this stuff is around this time in the early 80s, so, but to your point, Ron, that they tackle this issue. And I mentioned the All in the Family where Edith gets raped. That is in front of a studio audience, and the studio audience, not visibly, but audibly growls because this bad guy is in the house and they know something bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
This is a laugh track. Yeah. I think MASH has a few episodes without a laugh track. Yeah. Because they had the sense that we're not going to, we're not going to use it.
And not only that, but MASH did not put a laugh track during the operating scenes in the OR.
Yeah,
so
you're right. Yeah, that's a great distinction. Actually, I'm glad you made it. So there's a lot of like, until really like the middle of the first part, it's kind of like a standard episode. There's this guy who is Gordon Jump's character. He runs the bicycle shop, and when we meet him, we find out they've known him forever. They as long as the conceit of the show is that Mr. Drummond, Conrad Bain, he adopts the two sons of his housekeeper that passes away, and that's Gary Coleman and Todd Bridges. His biological daughter is Dana Plato. And when you see for our video audience this cast photo of everyone, it is very sad to see the cast of Diff'rent Strokes. Watching this episode is very sad in some ways, but it is very much of the time. The jokes are consistent with sitcom jokes. But even like towards the end of the show, there's still jokes around a serious conversation. And so there's some things I can give a credit to, I think. But you said you rewatched this last night, right, Ron?
Yeah. And, I was like kind of thinking about it, like the difference between watching it when I was 11 when it aired and the difference, I'm watching it now is that, I think like when I was 11, the message sunk through and I didn't see it as, haha, like, oh, it's ridiculous. They're making jokes, about, Gordon Jump's making jokes about taking your clothes off and there's big laughs. It's actually worse in the second episode, so we're going to discuss today, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I rewatched it last night and it was, it was heavy-handed, but it was just like there were just moments that were just like so bizarre. It's like, really, you needed a laugh line there, and especially the end of the episode, which
you talking about the end of the first episode or the end of the
second episode? Actually,
yeah. No, I know. And we'll kind of touch on all of that, but
right.
There's like the comedic scene of Mr. The bicycle man, he has Mr. Horton that he says that you should call me Curly. I mean, right there. Come on, boys. Did you think something was up? But
when I was 11,
and look, for a television sitcom in 1983, obviously some of this stuff needs to be telegraphed in a really broad way. He's like,
absolutely.
Would you boys like some wine? Like no, we're 11 or 12. I forget how old they are. They're like 11 or 12 though.
That would have been the correct answer.
Yeah, I know. But the scene where that Mr. Horton has these two boys in the back room, and we have been made aware of what his plans are for them. And Mr. Drummond comes in and he wants to pay for the bike that he's going to get Arnold for his birthday. The comedy is, would you shut up so I can go molest these two kids in the back room, please? And it's like, you talk about a different time. There's the Uncle Roy sketches from the first few years of SNL with Buck Henry. And it's like the funny uncle, the dirty old man, things like that are considered funny at a different time. And even this, where they're seriously tackling it, he's like, you got just sign right there. Could you sign right there, please? And I'm just like, how is this supposed to be funny? I part of me wishes that like I knew the episode so well, because I'm wondering, like, they have to cut it down for syndication for reruns because it's like 24 minutes. So I'm like, what do they cut out? First thing they cut out is Conrad Bain at the beginning. One of the shows, it's very easy to figure out what they cut out. There's whole sections that can go, but this one, and I was just like, it's like some of it's really uncomfortable, like the jokes. And there's some real moments. Anybody that has siblings, Arnold comes home and he's got wine on his breath. He's trying to hide it with the big wad of gum. And, both his biological brother and his adoptive sister, both Kimberly and Willis are like, all right, they're going to let him off the hook as long as he doesn't do it again, but they know that it's
Yeah.
been bad. But then
Yeah.
there's the moment where, Dudley's dad comes home. It's like, yeah, I didn't like that Dudley had wine on his breath yesterday. And he said he had it at your house. And they're like, okay, I guess we got to tell dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Exactly.
something that we probably should have told you. So it's still very sitcom-y, but honestly, I could feel the reality in that moment. And
Yeah.
I give a lot more credit to these episodes than I did in my head. I knew
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about this for like a decade. And when we were messaging a few weeks ago, I was like, I know exactly what we're going to do. I have a memory of this show in my head that was a little different than actually watching it. In some ways, it's better than I remembered. However, in other ways, it's so much worse.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely true. And I definitely felt that rewatching it last night. Yeah, it's just like, like you said, like when Arnold comes home with the wine on his breath and his, siblings are like, okay, we don't want him to get in trouble. Just, don't do it again. I never had older siblings, but, that's a very real sibling reaction. It's like, okay, I'll cover for you, but, don't do this again.
Yeah, I have an older brother and a younger sister. So I had both ends of that. I was covering for somebody and I was looking to be covered for. So,
right.
Yeah. So I could definitely, sit back and think like, oh,
but then like when, when Mr. Drummond confronts Arnold about it and, is going down the list, Arnold's telling him what's been going on at Mr. Horton's shop.
Yeah.
It's getting laughs. It's getting laughs. He's like, yeah, he showed us, pictures of him naked with other kids, and that gets a laugh.
And you don't want to know about the mice in that cartoon that I saw.
Yeah,
exactly.
About the birds and the bees, but that was nothing about these mice. Yeah, and
exactly.
I was just like, I could not. I'm like, you really need a laugh track here. I mean, this is, it's clear what's happening. So it was, that just kind of like blew me away.
Yeah, no, exactly. I definitely agree that it's the laughs in some of it. And one of the hallmarks of the very special episode, and there's an exception that I'll mention, is usually nothing bad happens to anyone in the main cast.
Yes.
Sometimes it's a friend at school. I think there's the drunk driving episode of Family Ties. The boyfriend died. They're not going to kill somebody off of the cast that way. Nothing like that. And then in this instance, I actually forgot that in my mind it was like, oh, Arnold got away, but poor Dudley. And Dudley did not have a good experience for what a kid should have happened to him in a room with an adult. But it was just like, he's like, well, he tried to touch me. And so it reminded me, I'm like, okay, so even Dudley didn't actually, and Dana Plato, Kimberly has a line at one point. I'm glad we got there before anything really bad happened. And I feel like that was probably important for the network to feel that the audience doesn't think differently of Dudley and certainly not of Arnold.
Right. That's 100% correct. And, my son, he's 17 and he discovered the very special episode series on Funny or Die. And of course they did this one. So, he was asking me about my memories of, watching it and stuff like that. And his question was, why did the writers choose to have Dudley, be molested instead of Arnold? And I said, that's one of the rules of the very special episode. Nothing bad ever happens to the main cast. Dudley, who's a recurring character, bad stuff could happen to him. But, if it was Arnold, then that would just like completely take the show off the rails.
Right. And it's like how, in Scream, they talk about the rules for horror movies. If you're a virgin at the end of the movie, you're going to live. It's that sort of a thing. So if you're the best friend, watch out.
Right. Exactly.
There's an exception, though, that because I've read about a lot of these and some of them are shows that I feel like we should tackle and some aren't. There's a Mr. Belvedere where the son goes away to camp and he is molested. And that is like one of the exceptions of the main cast member, something
Yep.
bad actually happens to them. And I was just like, wow, I mean, it feel like it's more impactful if you're going to take a swing at a topic like this. And I think it is important, and I'm feeling like I want to kind of go against what I said, and I roll the dice, and I'm not going to play a lot of clips, and for one of the episode, I'm not going to play any clips that have music in it, because that is
that's where you get in trouble.
That's the first sign of trouble on a lot of these things, but. I feel like it's so important, and I feel like a lot of people know this episode, even if you haven't seen it. They've joked about it. There's a joke about it on Family Guy, you know, and I'm honestly not sure of everywhere that you might hear something about it.
I was like explaining to you when we were, you know, prepping for this episode, you know, I said, if you go up to a random person and ask, you know, and say very special episode, the first one's probably going to be this one.
Yeah, so of a certain age, you know. For my wife's 7 years younger than me, and that's only half a flex. It's actually a fact. She would think of I think her first thought would be Saved by the Bell, where Jesse's taking caffeine pills. That generation, that's the first one. They may never actually see this, you know. And it's tough to convince people, like, oh, you know, once you get to season 6, you'll get to the you know, you'll get to that episode. So because it's from someone who posted it, this isn't an actual like a official link. I want to just play a little bit. This is the end of the episode where they're back at the Drummond's house.
How's he doing?
Well, he's still a little shaken up.
He's a lucky boy. He'll come out of this just fine. He's got a loving and understanding. You know, some parents actually blame the children for what happened.
That is dreadful. That is the worst thing you could do.
What's going to happen to Mr. Horton?
Well, I think we got a darn good case against him, Willis. Thanks to your father calling us, we were able to surprise him, and we found some very incriminating pictures.
Worse than the mice?
So, right there is why I want to show it. And you were able to hear that, right, Ron?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Sometimes the guests don't necessarily hear it. It's like, it's very important for them to hit all these points. And that's the police detective who, you know, arrives on the scene. That's how they're able to basically save the day before anything truly terrible happens. And so Arnold is like, worse than the mice. And the laugh track can't get enough of that, you know? And I think, look, the interaction between Dana Plato, Conrad Bain, and Todd Bridges, you know, all of them, what they're saying, it's like, this is important information. What's going to happen to him?
100%.
The most surprising exchange in the episode, and I think it's actually, it's about to come, is Willis says, I didn't even know he was gay. And then they talk about this isn't about that. And I'm like, for 1983 to make that distinction, I was shocked that that's in this episode. You know, I didn't remember that.
It's really weird because when it aired, I could have sworn that Willis got a laugh on that. But I mean, I could be completely, it could be like a Mandela effect, or, you know,
there could have been a laugh there. Let's just go a little bit more. We'll wait for the next laugh.
What is this world coming to?
There's a laugh.
Detective Simpson said it was a good thing we called him, because if I'd gone down and confronted Horton by myself, he would have been able to get rid of all the photographs before the police could even get there.
Unfortunately, most parents do just that, and the guy gets off scot-free. Oh, and by the way, Arnold, your evidence is going to help us a lot, too. I think I got all the details right here.
Here's the jokes.
There was a cherry on the banana split he gave you.
Did I mention the chopped nuts?
Yeah, that, too.
Boy, I really spilled my guts.
That's probably enough of the clips. You know, you don't want to call too much attention to yourself, but it's just like, why is any of that in there?
I know.
Is it because they feel like audiences are going to be uncomfortable, so you break the tension? If that's the reason, I get it, but
I don't think it works.
It does not work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm going back a scene when Mr. Drummond arrives with the two detectives at the bicycle shop. You know, they come in the front, and Mr. Horton's like, "Is there a problem?" And he's like, "There's a big problem." And then they go into the back where to the apartment, and Dudley's like, in another room, or essentially the bathroom, and the cop's like, now, let me go in first. You don't know what you're gonna find. And he opens the door, and there's a toilet flushing, and that gets a huge laugh. And I'm like, you really had to go for that punchline right there. This kid was on the verge of being sexually assaulted, and you decide to go with the toilet flushing joke. Yeah. I mean, oh my God, that just like completely, I never thought of that before, but watching it last night, I was just like, wow.
Yeah. Now, I hadn't watched this in a very long time. I could not tell you the last time I'd seen it. I'm of course familiar with it. I think that whenever I would talk to someone who didn't know what it was, I would talk about it. I may have pulled up a clip at some point. I hadn't watched it in a long time. This is the first time I watched it as a parent. And as much as it misses the mark in a lot of ways, in a number of times, I actually found myself being a little emotional for Dudley, because again, I thought that he got molested, and it's still terrible what happened to him, but they make sure to say, like, before anything really bad happened. And it's so upsetting to think about, like, and I was a smart ass 20 something probably the last time I saw this. So, and it's like, oh my God, it's like kids do stuff out of the house now. It's not like it used to be, but still, I mean, look, my son's in Cub Scouts, it's, and that's always like the big red flag is scouting in any way. Right. And, it's, you always start to worry about stuff like that. And so just the relief, when Dudley's dad is able to come in and everything's okay, I'm like, well, God damn it, you got me. And because I find it's a lot of things are different when you're a parent, and I'm sure that Ron and your kids are much older than mine, so I don't even know what I'm in store for as life goes on. But
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, it's really interesting because, as you said, like the last time I probably watched this, I was, it was definitely before I had kids, so I was looking at it through like a very snarky lens. But last night when I, watching these two episodes, I'm like, okay, there is stuff that works, that is effective. And, it kind of got back to me, it kind of took me back to when I originally saw it. And I'm like, oh yeah, because my mindset at the time, I wasn't being cynical about it. This was like a real thing. Like the way I kind of equate it is, when people talk about Adam West's Batman as being very camp and over the top and whatever. And I always said, hey, when I was 6 years old, when Batman said some days you can't get rid of a bomb, to me, that was deadly serious. So, when you're 11 years old and you're watching this.
The old Batman was always two parts. Like, what's this? That part at the end of the first part, I'm like, are they going to die? Like, am I going to tune in tomorrow after my nap and, they're going to be boiled in lava? I'm like, is this going to be what happened? I was legitimately worried about Batman and Robin and sometimes Batgirl.
And in the same way, when I was 11 years old, I was legitimately worried about Arnold and Dudley. Yeah. So,
I was old enough to know that I'm like, I think this is important that kids see this. I was aware enough of, like, fortunately, I didn't have anything in my life where I felt like this resounded with me in any way, but I'm like, oh, and I look, legitimately, people will tell you stories years later about stuff that happened when they were a kid, and it's like, adults taking advantage of children in situations that sometimes they're not sexual, but sometimes, it's like, oh my gosh. But in reading, I get all my information from Wikipedia, but the Wikipedia on this episode, I think the important thing is, look, we can sort of turn our nose up at some of the content and the way that they did it, but to illustrate the fact that it was important. So later in 1983, this episode re-airs, and a 9-year-old boy in Indiana saw it, and he told his mother about a man who was being inappropriate. And he was then arrested, and the police specifically said it's because this boy saw that episode of Diff'rent Strokes. So when you get to that, it's like, it's almost like, even if it was like, it's 50 minutes of actual show runtime, if every second of it was cringe, but then that happened. You're like, great.
Right.
So then that guy
Right.
gets arrested, and unfortunately, this kid had something terrible happen to him, but he didn't get to anybody else.
Yeah. And it's funny because you were talking about before how we were talking about how nothing bad ever happens to the main cast. And part of that was because television, particularly sitcoms, were a lot different now. There weren't like through lines, that went from episode to episode to episode. Everything was like a very self-contained story. So, when this happened to Dudley, this was never mentioned again. We never, Arnold never said, oh, are you, how's therapy, or are you okay? It was never mentioned again. So, I think that was
it wasn't like, they also didn't go for the cheap callback of like, well, we all know why Dudley doesn't have a bike. It wasn't anything like that. There's one joke in here that actually made me laugh out loud. They talked about, how they were kids drinking wine. And Willis says, he says something along the lines of, we'll talk about going from the nipple to the ripple. And I'm just like that shouldn't be funny. That joke shouldn't even be in there. But I literally laughed out loud because I just wasn't expecting it. When I saw that, I wouldn't. There's 0% chance I got that joke the first, 2 times I saw this.
Totally.
Yeah, so I think the legacy is, and there's they do other special episodes of Diff'rent Strokes later. Sam, the little, he gets kidnapped. They do other shows of Diff'rent Strokes. They, I think actually the last episode Dana Plato's in, they deal with bulimia, and so I think it's important to, you're coming into people's head. This is more in this era. You're coming into everybody's house. And if you speak to one kid, like I said, the kid in Indiana, it's worth it. And if everybody's like, can't believe you did that episode about this thing, So the legacy of this episode is that we do get so many very special episodes. And, there's differing degrees of, I think, seriousness for the topic. And, where do you think we should go next? Because we have two choices, and I know we talked about it beforehand, but I could go in either direction at this moment. So, where do you? Because
definitely Too Close for Comfort.
So we're going to talk about Too Close for Comfort, and people who don't remember the show, it starred Ted Knight, who everybody knows from Caddyshack.
Comedic genius. The guy's a comedic genius.
And by the way, in this, he is very good.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He's great on this show. It's no, it's not his character from Caddyshack, but it's close enough.
Yeah, exactly.
All the things that make you love his character.
Right.
I think
it's Ted Knight being Ted Knight, and that's why the show worked. So
now I didn't know about this episode until maybe about a year, maybe 2 years ago. I read about it, like The Onion wrote about it. I had no idea that they did this. I had seen very little of this show. I was mostly put off by the theme song. I would hear it and I'm like, nah. I don't know when it aired in reruns in New York, but it didn't catch me. It probably was when I was definitely sitting down for dinner. I knew Jim J. Bullock from the Hollywood Squares, the John Davidson hosted, the one that would have Alf on it and Whoopi Goldberg and Shadow Stevens. I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I only sort of knew what gay was at that point. I was just like, oh, that guy's really funny. It's like Paul, like in the old days, it was Paul Lynde. Like, oh, he's very funny. So, the idea that there's this episode, and I believe it's called 2 Women for Every Man. Is the actual title of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how well intentioned it is, because I think if you were to not watch it and be like, well, they talk about how sexual assault can happen to men.
Right.
That seems like, what? Yeah, somebody should make that point. It can definitely happen.
Yeah.
Sexual assault can happen to men by women. Okay. I guess we could talk about that. But what if the women are played for laughs?
Yeah.
And what if the fact is that, what I'll mention is that having read about it, and I didn't see it, I never saw it until yesterday when I watched it for the first time. Mm-hmm. So it was not quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought that the whole thing was 100% played for laughs the whole time.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
and Ted Knight kind of takes it a little bit seriously, not at first,
yeah,
but then eventually he does, and I'm like, oh, okay, it has a little bit of a different tone to it. But
yeah,
Ron, you mentioned me, you messaged me
yes.
about when you saw this. So talk about watching this episode for the first time. It was produced for like the third season of the show, and it didn't. They sat on it for like a year, so they clearly knew.
Yeah.
You know, they definitely knew that like,
Right,
this
right.
might be more trouble than it's worth. And then for our visual audience, one of the visual gags is we see Monroe, who is a security guard at the mall. He has been his uniform is all disheveled, and boy, they really hit that. They broke my beeper joke a number of times, don't they, Ron?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I saw this episode on its first airing. I probably watched way too much television than I really should have. But luckily enough, I was able
But
to
that would be a
sort of-
perfect example of why guys like you, Tom Kelly, and I all get along, you know? So-
Exactly. So from from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, which was my bedtime, my mom and I liked a lot of the same TV shows and sitcoms or whatever. My dad would usually go into another room, watch the baseball or hockey or something like that.
Right.
So I think this aired like 9:30, and I'm in the living room with my mother, and we're watching this episode. And, it was like almost like we didn't say a word to the entire episode, not during the commercial breaks, not during the episode itself. And when it ended, we kind of had like an unspoken pact that we would never talk about it ever again. But I will say, like, at one point, I think this was like the first time I learned what a rape was, the word rape. And like, I asked my mom, what's rape? And, my mom was like, well, it's when, someone forces another person to do things that they really don't want to do,
Which is a great way to
like,
explain it to a child. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And like, again, I think I was like 9 or 10 when this aired. So yeah. But yeah, it was just like a lot of people like talk about how uncomfortable they were watching this. And I'm like, yeah, well, imagine being 9 and watching this with your mom. So,
yeah, that is pretty rough. And
yeah.
It's interesting though, because they do make there's buried within sort of the way that this whole thing is mishandled and played for laughs.
Oh man.
There's a very important line that I'm like, they make a great point. And it's like, he's like, oh, whenever I see those movies about the woman who's raped, nobody believes her.
Yeah.
And I think it's the wife. I don't know the show that well.
Muriel. Yeah.
Muriel. And she says, well, you shouldn't watch movies like that. And he says, that's all that's on. And I'm like, you know what? Especially in this time period, what would get your TV movie on? It would be
exactly
sort of that. And it's like, people, to this day, the modern version of that is like the fascination with podcasts and documentaries about serial killers and true crime. And it's like, you don't have to watch it, in those days, it was a little bit harder because it's like, if you didn't have cable, you had like, 10 channels and you'd have to watch one of them,
right.
So, and it's just like, I don't know. And I thought it was going to be so much worse, but watching it in the context of today, you're just like, oh yeah. I mean, they don't really acknowledge in the show, Monroe has girlfriends, right? They don't have him as a gay character, right?
They never say he's gay, but I don't remember. Know, I mean, I remember watching the show, but I don't remember too much about it other than, Ted Knight played a cartoonist and he had 2 daughters, and there was a guy named Monroe.
Right.
So I don't remember if it was left like ambiguous or what. But yeah, it was, I mean, if you ask someone, they would probably say, oh, well, yeah, Monroe was gay. But it wasn't like straight up, you know, admitted to at the time, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So, this idea that, and there's legitimate laughs because they do find where this happened, which
Yeah.
is an incredibly convoluted series of events that lead to them
Yeah.
finding it. He
Yeah.
just remembers where the turns are, and they're sitting there with a
Right.
map of San Francisco, and is it's
Right.
in the Tenderloin, and then there's like a legitimate moment where like he opens the door, and this is definitely the apartment, and
Yeah.
a very large woman shows up,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh no, that's the little one."
Yeah.
It's a legitimate laugh. You can't help but think like, And then the big one is, I guess it's a transvestite. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
they were never clear about that. They
they
I
never
don't know
were.
if
Yeah,
it's I'm not sure if it's like, someone that's transgender, someone, a guy in
yeah,
drag, or it's supposed to be an actual woman. They
yes,
never, and in this episode, any of those three explanations was totally possible.
yes,
Just because of the way, I mean, I'm actually more inclined to go, it was supposed to be an actual woman, just from the tone of this entire episode. It was just like, I'm still speechless. Like, you say it wasn't as bad as you thought it would be. It was worse than I remembered it.
right, because you saw it, so you had something. Just reading about it, yeah, and the Onions AV Club and Grantland both. There's both articles that that I read about each of these, and it just made me think that the act of him being raped by two women was played for more laughs than it was. But to be fair, it was definitely played for laughs.
Oh yeah. I mean, Ted, when the cop comes in, Ted Knight is explaining to the cop that Monroe was raped in like the most Ted Knight way possible. It's like, well, he was, like kind of like that. And I thought I don't know what they were going for. I don't know if they were
Right.
trying to draw attention to this, or the topic, or if they were just like, oh, here's an idea, like if it was just like another story. It was like really, really weird. And particularly like when Ted Knight goes to the apartment, the first thing the woman says to her partner is to warm up the Jello. So, and again, huge laughs. So it was just like really, really off key.
Right. And, we end up with there's, Monroe leaves Ted Knight's character there and, just runs home, and he loses his shoes and is played for last. But it's like, his wife, Muriel, called the police when they left. So they got there, we didn't see any of this.
Just
happen.
in time.
Just in time. So nothing, so what happened? So, this is an exception to the rule that, like I was saying, though, that this did happen to Monroe, but they must have been like, but what if he gets kidnapped and he has to, be with women? And then it's like, oh, that's not funny enough. If it was two very attractive women, then I can only imagine what that story would have been, how the way they would have played it, so you can still make it. And yeah, I mean, this is I feel like this was written for the laughs, and then in the process of rewriting it and before they shot it, they probably decided like, well, we can probably very special episode this. But again, the fact that it didn't air for more than a year from when it was supposed to, and I think it's one of those things where it left a network, and then it went into first run syndication, and then this episode ended up in first run syndication. So they kind of knew what they had in the sense of like, we're not going to put this on. It's fascinating to watch because you can see how the show works within this, as how it works on a regular basis. You're like, okay, so his daughters stay out late, and I'm like, they seem a little old. I don't know what age they're supposed to be, but
they're like, I think they're like in their 20s, possibly 30s, and he's like, what? Where were you last night?
I know. It's like, well, Daddy, I didn't get home until 3 a.m. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
she's an adult. She lives in San Francisco.
3 a.m.
Yeah. Right. Monroe. So yeah, this is I don't know. It's oh boy. It
Yeah,
was
I mean,
definitely something to see. And as much as I want to play clips from it, I think people should just go and watch the whole thing themselves.
completely agree.
I think that they'll get something out of watching
It has to be
and this is on Tubi for free. You were the one who made me aware of that.
Yeah.
Diff'rent Strokes was actually a little bit harder to find because there's a place for it on Amazon Prime, but for some reason I couldn't watch it there, so I just watched it on YouTube.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know if you
thought.
watched it.
Yeah, that like for months
Yeah.
it was on Amazon
It's,
Prime.
the
but then it said-
episodes are there, but it says you can't.
Yeah.
It's temporarily
yeah, this
unavailable.
video's not available.
So the whole thing was on YouTube, and you could tell somebody had bless whoever bought the DVD set and then also uploaded the 2 episodes back to back. Because look, you can kind of find things in that way. So this one's for free on Tubi, and I think it is kind of jaw dropping in a way. There's an infamous Incredible Hulk, not the TV show, but an issue where Bruce Banner's on the run and he stays at the YMCA. This is very on the nose. And 2 guys try to get with him in the shower, and you don't want to do that to the Hulk. No. And you cannot find that story digitally. Marvel understood even before Disney. They're like, yeah, we're gonna have to bury that one, So there's definitely some things are from a time and place, but like you said, you watch this first run and you're like, no, this is not working.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that as we wind down, we have to, of course, just go and make sure we lighten the mood. I definitely remembered our last one, but what I remember the most about it is that periodically on Facebook you'll find a reason to post about this. And I think it's such a weird pairing, and I've read enough about it that I understand it better than I did. But we're talking about the episode of What's Happening. It's a 2-parter where the Doobie Brothers guest star.
Probably the least needed very special episode ever made.
I agree, because the very special aspect of this is to cut down on bootlegging, and it's bad to record concerts. And it's so reading about it, this comes about because the Doobie Brothers had a couple albums out. They weren't big yet. They were on the way up, and they'd hired a new publicist. Did you know all this, Ron? Did you
No,
read this?
No.
So their publicist was a gentleman named David Guest, who would go on to marry Liza Minnelli.
Yeah. Yes, he married Liza Minnelli. That's right.
Yeah. So he has the idea of, hey, there's an opportunity to be on a sitcom. And some of the guys in the band liked it, and some of the guys were like, oh, I don't know about this. But they all agreed that it was good exposure. And I could not believe how much exposure the Doobie Brothers get. Between these 2 episodes. There's the second episode has 3 songs consecutively. So this is what I was talking about in the intro when I'm talking about how you edit things down for syndication. It's like, you go ahead and take that, whatever that song is that's not the 2 big hits. You just got to take that out, and you have plenty of room for more commercials. And I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
When I was watching it, this morning, I was thinking to myself, is this What's Happening or Don Kirshner's rock concert?
Yeah. And it was a fairly big opportunity for the Doobie Brothers because, like I said, they had sold some albums, but they were not huge at this point. So it was great exposure, and the guys in the band talking about it, they definitely understood that it was going to be a good way for them to reach a different audience than what they usually talk to, so they were going to be heard by a different audience. And some of these songs are fairly great. You know, they hold up pretty well. But the Doobies themselves actually took out an ad. I don't know if it's from like Billboard or, you know, Spin Magazine or Rolling Stone or something.
I've never
but
seen this.
So there's like a Doobie Brothers ad. Like, all 7 Doobie Brothers take their unique brand of rock and roll to a new audience on January 28th and February 4th on 2 back-to-back episodes of ABC TV's What's Happening. The Doobies will sing, play, and make their live in-person acting debuts. The last part being what I think some of the guys were less comfortable with. You know, good thing Michael McDonald's a good singer is what I'm trying to say. But I watched, you know, it's another thing too, is because it was on reruns. I definitely watched a fair amount of What's Happening, but I feel like that might've been the 5:30 show because I didn't see as much of it. I definitely remember some episodes. I had not watched any What's Happening in a long time. And I do have to give tremendous credit to Danielle Spencer, who played Dee, because of just how incredibly funny she is on this show.
Yeah.
And the precocious child is definitely, you know, a staple of sitcoms. Gary Coleman to some extent is that, but just the level of snark and sass and making her brother give her a quarter so he can use the phone. I'm like, oh, she's great. And of course I remembered Rerun and Dwayne Wayne. You know, hey, no, it's not Dwayne Wayne. That's on A Different World.
Dwayne.
But and you know, and Raj, he was always the weak link for me when I would watch this. You know, and What's Happening Now didn't kind of help Raj.
No.
You know, he was still the weak link. But it's such a random idea. They're pretending that the Doobie Brothers went to some high school and they're in Watts, right? Here in LA, like the LA area. So like they went to high school in Watts, really? And
that's the best part.
And Rerun is so old that he went to high school with them, by the way. Like, hey man, I remember you. What are you doing back here? No, I'm still here.
I never left.
Does that fit into the timeline established in the show? I don't think it does. I don't think Rerun's that old, you know?
Well, the joke with Rerun is that his name is Rerun because he keeps on getting left back in school. I think they mentioned that in the first episode. But that was my favorite. It's like, first of all, they're acting like the Doobie Brothers are actual brothers, you know, that they all went to school together, or it was like kind of weird. But these guys, you know, going to school in Watts. So,
and at least they tried to explain why they're playing at a high school. It's like, they're raising money for the new instruments. Don't ask any more follow-up questions, please. You know,
that's all you need to know.
That's literally all you need to know. And they're like, all right, sure. And just the, you know, Rerun gets approached at the soda shop. A big shout out. Also, like Shirley Hemphill is also she's great on this.
She is.
As Shirley. And someday I can tell you Dennis Miller, early in his career, he toured opening for Shirley Hemphill. He has very nice things to say, but he tells this great story, the humiliation of her beating him in tennis. And it's that's what it's like if you get to have lunch with Dennis Miller. You get Shirley Hemphill stories that you weren't expecting.
That's awesome.
But anyway, and I think that the show is cast really well. The mom character doesn't seem to really factor into these episodes. Was that kind of always the case? You know, that these kids are kind of left on their own.
Well, I mean, you know, the background to that is I think like in the first season, she had like more to do. And again, like I haven't really watched that much What's Happening lately. Outside of these 2 episodes. But I do know that that Mabel King did not come back for the 3rd season because she felt like her character, you know, the show was focusing too much on the kids and she didn't really have much to do. So, you know, these episodes, she was right.
No, it's very apparent. It's the Fonzie or Urkel factor, you know, where you set out to make a show about something and you're like, no, this is the thing that people like. Yeah. What were you going to say, Ron?
Right. But the episode after the two-parter is, I guess that this could also be classified as a very special episode. Rerun gets involved with a cult that worships a head of lettuce. And I remember the mother was instrumental in the plot to getting him out of the cult. So
I kind of wish I'd watched just one more episode so that I could have seen that.
Yeah, it's another famous episode, probably outside of the Doobie Brothers. It's the most famous episode.
Yeah. And it's funny because, there's a number of articles where former or current Doobie Brothers talk about it's like, yeah, every concert still somebody comes up to us and say, which Doobie you be, which Raj says on the phone, which Doobie you be.
Yes, I remember.
And it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, they played Jones Beach here on Long Island, and I was so tempted to get a front row seat and just cosplay as Rerun from this episode with like the giant tape recorder.
The giant tape recorder. Yeah,
exactly. I think that was like one of those old reel-to-reel tape recorders that he had.
Yeah, one of the write-ups I read of this talk about like inexplicably a giant reel-to-reel tape recorder, and that is kind of the funniest part of it is that it actually did not record the show. It's just like all you hear is the popcorn and the soda in his pocket, so it's like, well, he could have gotten arrested for attempted bootlegging, but he didn't actually bootleg, and it's such a random thing to take a stand on. But I guess they were like, well, the Doobie Brothers are going to be on, let's figure out a way to do it,
to incorporate.
And and they're like, all right, I guess. And I mean, you want to talk about the very special episode nobody needed. Let's talk about the two-parter that nobody needed. There's so many songs between these two episodes. And again, I'm not a huge Doobie Brothers fan, but I will definitely agree that some of these are great songs,
Oh yeah.
Totally. That Black Water song, there's great songs. Taking It to the Streets, that should be in every rerun of this. No pun intended, Freddie Berry. But and it's just like, yeah, they just get to go watch them rehearse at the school, and then they have an interview, and it's all like, yeah, well, what's the biggest problem? Well, I'll tell you what the biggest problem is bootleg in our concerts. And he's like, what's that? And again, I would play these clips, but I get nervous. I don't blame you. You see what YouTube strikes things for. And Sony owns this show, so I don't mean my show. Sony owns What's Happening, and I'm definitely not playing any Doobie Brothers clips of their music. I will sneak some stuff into the audio version. I'll let people know. So
cool.
That I don't worry about as much.
But
for YouTube, you got to be careful, and it's so ridiculous. But there's these, kind of low level gangsters that apparently follow the Doobie Brothers on tour. Because this guy Dunbar bootlegged their show in St. Louis.
Yes.
And I'm like, all right, so why did he need to record another one? You really can't peel much back, when it comes to this, but I don't know. And it's, it's definitely, I would say, you watch a rerun again, not Fred Berry. You watch an episode of What's Happening, and you're like, oh yeah, I mean, they were just trying to have fun.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know if I classify this as, or if it was intended as a very special episode, but I think it makes the episode.
It's very special in a way, as they have these guest stars and they're dealing with something, and just watching it. This was on the Roku channel, so it's also free there. But it's like the end of the first one, they give you 5 minutes of the next episode, and then the recap in the second episode is 5 minutes of the last one. And I'm like, all right, I'm glad Dee's helping us remember what happened last week. And I'm like, thanks, Dee. I'm glad that you were able to tell us. But see, now look at this image for our visual audience. It's all the Doobie Brothers. It's our three leads from What's Happening at the table. And then, of course, Ron Motta and I off to the side. But it's interesting when you have these atypical episodes. So no, this doesn't fit the very special in terms of a lesson learned, but they definitely went above and beyond to tell what they felt like was a special story, to do a special episode.
Yes.
And I can't say that I remembered this, but you post about it regularly. And I love how often it's able to come up. Now, not a very special episode in the same sense. We're not going to talk about it here, but I do love how every year you talk about the greatest half hour of Thanksgiving programming in television history, which of course is the WKRP in Cincinnati episode. That if the first time you see it, just the reveal at the end is just it's so funny, to have been able to hold off that long to like give away something that we might do an episode on that. Honestly,
I was just gonna say, I mean, the brilliant thing about that episode is that everything just like it's like a very slow build, and it builds to like that one punchline. And that's why I always say it's like the greatest half hour, of television ever produced. It's just like so well constructed. There was an episode of Seinfeld with when George pretended to be the marine biologist. That was that was very similar to that as well. Where everything just like built to that Kramer's last line.
It builds to the moment where George has to say, I'm not really a marine biologist. I have no idea what to do in this situation. That's a great comparison. And look, there's very few perfect episodes of television. I always point to the pilot of Married with Children because it's so well written that it is still funny 35 years later. But do you want to know what that show was like, at least for the first 5 years? Just watch that 25 minutes. They hit everything. You understand Marcy, you understand Steve. This is before Jefferson. I remember interactions from Alan Pegg, decades later, what are you thinking about? Well, if I wanted you to know, I'd be talking, and I'm like, it's a great point, Al. I have not modeled my life after him, but I don't have any no ma'am shirts, but well, Ron, I'm glad we went on this road, and I'm glad that we didn't just go from the Bicycle Man to Maud's abortion, and I think the way to do it is to kind of have a couple of fun ones. This is one fun one. There's two parts. I mean, I should have kept track of the amount of screen time the Doobie Brothers get playing songs, just cutaways of the guys dancing in the audience, but it's like whole songs,
I mean, between the two episodes, it's easily like 7 or 8 minutes. I think.
Yes, easily. Yeah, I know. Easily. And it's like, really, these guys love the Doobie Brothers. All right. Although Dee has a pretty good line about how her favorite band is the Jackson 4 because there's one of them she doesn't like. Although I don't even know if she says which one it is, but we can all figure out that it was Tito. But anyway, Ron, this has been everything I wanted it to be all the time that I've wanted to, talk about very special episodes. And I would like people either in the comments on the YouTube video, if it doesn't get taken down for that Diff'rent Strokes clip, if either in the YouTube or just tweet me at Christian DMZ, or you can find me on Instagram there, or you can even email us, Bladtcast@gmail.com, BLADTCAST. Talk about some of the very special episodes you remember. I mean, there are other ones from later, more recent shows. I can't think of the last very special episode that I remember, though, because sitcoms are sort of serving a different purpose now, I mean, it sort of goes after things in a completely different way. But in any case, I feel like it's been a delight to talk to our guest, Ron Motta, and where you can find him is probably on future episodes of this show, because as I mentioned, it is egregious that I have not talked to him about Star Trek or Doctor Who at any point in the past. So we'll have to rectify that, because it's always delightful to spend time with Ron Motta. And so that's where you can find him, is future episodes of the Bladtcast. And if you have questions or comments from Ron, you can send them to me, all the places that I mentioned that I can be found. This was definitely a lot of fun to do, and we will absolutely revisit the idea of very special episodes, and that's why I'm inviting you to send us some of your favorites, some that immediately come to mind for you. But that is all the time we have for right now. Make sure that if you enjoy the Bladtcast, you like, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcasts. Bladtcast. That is our YouTube channel. It is also where you can find the audio version of this show, wherever podcasts can be found. And if you like me, you will find me Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on the Who Are These Podcasts broadcast network. I stuck the word broadcast in there unnecessarily, but the show is called Who Are These Broadcasters? And that is Tuesdays, 3 Eastern, noon Pacific, where we go throughout the different kinds of broadcasting over the last week. We play clips, we make jokes, we laugh, and we have fun. That's where you can find that. And I believe the next episode of this show is going to be our Major League Baseball playoff preview. And if you know the panel that we always select for that, we're all Mets fans. So we'll get to the playoff baseball. But, oh boy, do we have a lot of stuff to sort through ahead of time. And none of it good. So if you hate the Mets, even if you hate baseball, you'll probably enjoy that. We'll be able to fill you in on any and all of that. That would not be this time on the Bladtcast. That'll be next time on the Bladtcast.